Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is the Paul Harrell program you're listening to right now. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul today. And right now we have a special guest. I want to introduce Jacob Bundrick, who is with ACRE, Arkansas Center for Research in Economics. And wanted to have Jacob on, talk a little bit about what he's been working on and writing on. So, Jacob, welcome to the Paul Harrell program. Welcome back.
Hey, Josh. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be with you today.
Yeah, so kind of for maybe people who haven't heard you before on the program, explain what ACRE is, and then what is your role with ACRE?
Yeah, ACRE is a university-based research center that's housed in the College of Business over at UCA, and we research Arkansas state-level economic policy. So we have a few different areas that we research. We take a hard look at tax policy, regulations that inhibit earning a living, so things like occupational licensing. We look at a little bit of economic development policy that's kind of tied into tax policy, so that's things like targeted economic development incentives. We look at K-12 education, governmental transparency, things of that nature. So our goal is to try to use data to find out what these policies that the state's enacting do to the lives of Arkansans, and if there's solutions that we can implement to try to make lives in Arkansas better.
Yeah, and that's what I really like about ACRE. It's, I'm kind of a nerd sometime on these numbers. I really like the numbers, but also y'all offer, solutions. It's not just, okay, here's kind of things that aren't so good. There's solutions. And so I was looking at a recent article you had actually in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette about some of the, you called it targeted economic development incentives, and kind of how that, or let's back up a little bit, I guess. So you talked first about job growth versus economic growth and how that can kind of be different. So how is that different, job growth versus economic growth?
Yeah, so I think to talk about job growth and economic growth, it's all part of economic growth, right? But there seems to be a heavy emphasis on Arkansas's unemployment rate. As we all have been made well aware through recent headlines, that Arkansas has a very low unemployment rate. We're at 3.4%, which is about 14th in the country, which is great, but that's not the only measure that there is for an economy, right? So as economists, we generally look at a variety of standard of living statistics, so these different measurements that try to give us an idea of how well off people are. And so when we look at some of these other statistics, such as GDP per capita, which is a measure of productivity, GDP growth, per capita personal income, and the poverty rate, Arkansas doesn't rank as favorably. We're actually the laggards in those different categories, those different statistics there. So that was really kind of the main point of that article, is to say, well, let's wait a minute, and it's great that we have a low unemployment rate, but there's other parts of this economy that we should be looking at.
Yeah, and I'm looking at these numbers you have with the GDP per capita, and so that's, makes it comparable between the states, and it says we're 47th in the country in GDP per capita.
Yeah, so relatively speaking, GDP per capita is our output per person. GDP is a number that gets thrown around quite a bit. It's just a measure of productivity and how productive we are as people. If we put it per person, like Josh said, we're able to kind of compare how productive we are with states like Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, all these other states, right? And when we look at how Arkansas compares to other states in the country, we come in at 47th. So that's not quite as exciting as our low unemployment rate number.
Yeah, and I think people see that, or they feel that number, I think maybe, because I think people see the 3.4% and are encouraged by that, but what they're feeling is, the output per capita, but also, the income, and that ties in with that. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, our income is a product of our productivity. People get paid based on how much productivity, how much value they're able to add to the respective business that they either operate or they work for, right? So if we're not as productive when it comes to our work, naturally our income is lower, and that's why Arkansas ranks relatively low when it comes to personal income.
Okay. And then you got some numbers here on not only GDP per capita, but GDP growth. And it says here 0.2% from 2014 to 2015 and 0.8% from 2015 to 2016. And that's below the national average. So what does that tell us, those numbers?
Yeah, that's just looking at how much are we growing from year to year. Are we becoming more productive? Are we having more output? And what we see is we're growing, but very, very slow, right?
Mm-hmm.
The national growth rate and from 2014 to 2015 was 2.6%, all right? We grew at 0.2% as a state. So we're lagging well behind the national average there. When we look at 2015 to 2016, Arkansas grew at 0.8%, but the national average was 1.5%. So we're lagging behind in our growth when it comes to productivity.
Okay. And then looking now at the kind of tying that back in what we already talked about, the per capita personal income of $39,345. It says 45th in the country, and then the poverty rate for 2015 we're 47th in the country. So that's, kind of what you're saying. It's, we see the unemployment rate. That looks good. When we dive in a little bit more to these numbers, maybe not as good, could be better. And so what are some policies that, they've driven the unemployment rate down pretty low, but what are some policies that you think could maybe improve this actual economic growth?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different factors that go into the health of an economy, not just Arkansas's, but other states and the countries as a whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of these things are just out of our control, right? Arkansas is never going to be on an ocean, right? We just,
right.
as much as we want to pick it up and set it down on the Gulf of Mexico, we just can't do that,
yeah.
right? But there are different policies that we can control, and those are some of the things that we should focus on. So one of the big things is tax policy. And we know that there's a task force that's been created to kind of look at our tax policy.
Mm-hmm.
But within that tax policy, we should be looking specifically at some of our targeted economic development incentives.
Okay.
We frequently use these. These are things like these tax breaks for select businesses, or these cash subsidies that we give to companies to try to lure them to the state. We should be looking at those from what the impact of those policies have on the broad economy, rather than just hey, we gave a tax break to this company or a subsidy to that company. What happened to that individual company?
Okay, so that's kind of a term that's kind of popular now, this idea of corporate welfare. Is that kind of a slang term, I guess, of these targeted economic development incentives?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a hot button phrase there.
Yeah.
Some people like to phrase it that way. We'll stick from the research side. We'll call it targeted economic development incentives.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's one and the same, right? And there's a lot of excitement around these, right? There's a pressure that constituents put on policymakers of, hey, our income is low, our GDP growth is slow, or GDP per capita is low. You got to do something. You got to do something to boost this, right? And so one of the things that politicians have historically gone to, not just in Arkansas but in other states, are these select tax breaks and these select subsidies. But what that misses is that by using these incentives for special companies, politically favored companies, we end up actually distorting the economy that makes us worse off. And there's several different ways that happens. So the biggest thing, I won't say it's the biggest thing, but one of the things is that with these targeted economic development incentives, we're primarily targeting job growth rather than broad economic growth, right? So if we think about some of the tax incentives that Arkansas employs, create rebate, some things like that, those are all tied to job growth, right? You get this cash rebate if you create so many jobs, and you have payroll of this amount, right?
Yeah.
But
and if you don't, maybe not, though. Because the clawback provisions, I read some of your other work, the clawback provisions don't always materialize. So, anyways, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm getting long-winded here, but it's exciting for me to talk about this stuff. So, like you, I'm a nerd.
Yeah,
so,
well, this is good. I think it's good for everyone to be informed about.
Yeah. So the whole idea there is that you're targeting one aspect of the economy, and yes, jobs are important. People need jobs, right? But jobs aren't the end-all, be-all. And one of the things that I like to go to is, it's a ridiculous example, but it really helps illustrate the point, right? So we want this low unemployment rate, but the unemployment rate's not everything. It doesn't necessarily mean that our wages are increasing, that our income's increasing, that our productivity is increasing. And the way that you can see that is, imagine a scenario where the government hired half of the Arkansas population to dig a ditch and the other half to immediately refill it.
There you go. Problem solved.
Right. Everyone has a job, right? No one is out of work. But I think very few people would argue that our lives are significantly improved, that our incomes are increasing, that we're having this innovation that comes with, the market forces that lead to increased standards of living. But we've got a low unemployment rate. So these incentives that specifically target jobs and job growth miss some of the broader economic growth that we should be focused on. That, maybe if we look at some broad tax reform, at, simplifying the tax code, eliminating special exemptions, and reducing rates, that would provide for us.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. That's sometimes hard to get across, in the legislature, because they see these businesses and these foreign companies that come in. But one way that I kind of think about it, and it's maybe a little simplistic, but you got business A over there, and they're up and running. They aren't getting any special tax breaks from the government. They're maybe a mom and pop family business, and they're just going along. They're paying their taxes. They're doing everything they need to do. They're complying with all these burdensome regulations, and so they're creating value that's being taxed. It's being sent to the government, and now the government's sending their tax dollars for another company to come in and basically not only compete against them, but maybe be in a position to hire away their workers at a higher wage because, they're being subsidized somewhat by the government. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that. It's sort of this perverse system where we say exactly like you said, where, hey, all these businesses that are in industry X, pay your taxes, have your workers pay your taxes, and we're going to take your tax dollars and directly subsidize your competitor, right? And what we've seen in the data, and not just in Arkansas but in other states, is that a lot of times what happens is there's a market that's saturated, right? So, there's a limited supply of labor, there's a limited supply of capital, and we subsidize a politically favored business, and they come into this saturated market, and because they have this artificial competitive advantage, the subsidy, they're able to maybe hire away employees from some of the existing businesses, right? Or they're able to get cheaper credit, which enables them to, have lower prices and basically outcompete the existing firms, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes that happens to the point where those existing firms go out of business. So we look at the business that got the subsidy or the tax break, and, hey, maybe they have created the amount of jobs that they said they were going to create, maybe. But if we look at the broader economy, we've supported that one business at the expense of these other businesses. So on net, we haven't really seen that gain that the people who support these types of programs are hoping that we will.
Okay. Well, that makes sense to me. But for whatever reason, we see, session after session, the legislature keep improving because, it's kind of easy to do, just hand out more money and they promise jobs and, that sounds really good and the headlines are great. And now if they ever materialize, that's one thing. But kind of what you're talking about, it's a little distorting of the economy there. One other thing I wanted to talk about, you've mentioned already, ACRE has a great resource out on tax reform. I think I partnered with the Tax Foundation. I actually carried the book with me to the task force meeting when I'm there listening to them. So I can refer to that as a great resource. So tell us a little bit about that project that ACRE's done, and what y'all hope to see, I guess, going forward with the task force now.
Yeah, so the project that you're referring to is called Arkansas, the Roadmap to Tax Reform, and that can be found on our website. That's uca.edu/ACRE. That's ACRE, and it's right there on the homepage. And that was a project where we, like you said, we partnered up with the Tax Foundation, and one of our scholars, Dr. Jeremy Horpedahl, who's a professor of economics here at UCA, he and several people from the Tax Foundation spent about a year going around the state, interviewing different people who have different stakes in the tax system, right? So these are maybe individuals that are paying taxes, they're businesses that are paying taxes, they're policymakers that are paying or trying to figure out what the best tax system is for Arkansas. So they compiled all these interviews, roughly 200 of them,
wow,
and looked at the data, both historical and current day. And then look at the tax code and said, okay, here's what Arkansas's tax system has historically looked like. Here's what it looks like today. Here's where we could make this better. And they laid out several suggestions, I think 3. And it was basically looking at, hey, look, here's a few different ways that we could simplify Arkansas's system. All right? Now, we could make this revenue neutral, or we could also cut taxes along with it. But here's a way that we could get significant tax reform that would make Arkansas more competitive, all right? And so the biggest thing that they found is that we have quite a bit of special exemptions. You know, we largely do not apply the sales tax to services, right? But we're becoming more and more of a service economy. So one of the things that we could do is apply the sales tax to services and use that revenue to reduce income taxes for everyone, right? We have a bunch of different brackets for our individual income tax schedule, but more
we have
than
like
that,
the
we have
most?
different. Yes,
some of the most.
Either the most or the second most.
Okay, that's
but
fine.
but the one thing that we have that's different than everyone else is we actually have 3 different schedules.
Yeah, it's
so
confusing.
if you make below a certain amount of income, all of your income's taxed at according to that schedule. But if you're in between that amount of income and another amount, all of your previous income is taxed at a higher rate, right? So we create these tax cliffs that is really damaging. It's really distorting. And that's something that we should really look at addressing just to make our tax environment more competitive. So the idea was we would do this study, we would take it to the legislature, with just some ideas and some data to really show how we can improve Arkansas's tax environment. So it's a great project. It's available for everyone out there to read. It's really easy to read, and we hope you'll take a look at it.
Yeah, I encourage everyone as well to go check that out because it's just a great resource. It's really broken up and compartmentalized really well too for corporate taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, property taxes, each by chapter. And so whatever you're needing, you can go right to the chapter and find it and be like, okay, this is what it is. And at the end, there's recommendations, basically to, like you said, make us more competitive. And at the end of the day, make us a good jobs magnet. We hear that a lot, and so I hope to see that in the task force. I know some people are pessimistic about it based on other task forces, but hey, Jacob, I really appreciate you coming on and all the work y'all do. And again, just tell everyone the contact information for ACRE. You said once the website and social media and all that.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for having me. Again, you can find our work at uca.edu/ACRE. Feel free to poke around. You can find our emails for any of our scholars on there. We have lots of work. You can see our different student programs and our different events. So thanks again, Josh, and take care.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. We'll be talking to you soon. All right. Well, we are going to take a break right now on the Paul Harrell program. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul, and we'll be right back.